In a jaw-dropping surprise on May 13, 2025, President Trump announced that $600 billion of Saudi money will flow into the U.S., coupled with a $142 billion U.S. arms sale to Saudi Arabia.
States and Saudi Arabia have signed a $142 billion arms deal on the first day of President Trump's tour of the Middle East, his first major trip since he returned to the White House.
The Saudis will plow $600 billion into the US, including AI, chip making and infrastructure. Mohammed bin Salman also wants Trump and co to buy into his pet project, an artificial metropolis in the sand, Neom, a futuristic fantasy land which will provide, amongst other things, skiing in the desert, according to the CIA. But today, Trump lavished him with praise.
By one count, this package is the largest set of commercial agreements on record between the nations. It all adds up to a financial tsunami breaking over global markets. Even the White House bragged of over $2 trillion in Gulf commitments, a figure that makes a billion-dollar deal look trivial. Independent analysts tally closer to $700 billion. Heads of state were caught off guard. Media outlets scrambled. What Riyadh has just laid bare is astonishing. Such an announcement shattered the usual guardrails. The Saudi master plan was whispered about behind closed doors. But this, an economic juggernaut stampeded onto the world stage. In one day, the Desert Kingdom went from a wary U.S. ally to an all-out investor in U.S. industry. Aramco alone signed 34 contracts worth about $90 billion with American firms. Tech giants, Google, Oracle, AMD, and others, pledged $80 billion more in cutting-edge ventures. In effect, Riyadh has woken a sleeping giant of capital. The markets reacted with a jolt. Stock indices, currencies, oil futures all hiccuped on the news. In Washington and Beijing alike, analysts are scrambling to interpret this gold dune gambit. The old status quo has been blown apart. Saudi Arabia's master plan, once a secret, is now a roaring reality, and the world can only brace for its consequences. This is no ordinary investment spree. It's a seismic shift in Middle East power. Analysts warn that Trump's whirlwind visit sealed the emergence of a new Sunni-led Middle East order centered on Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. In other words, a Sunni vanguard of petrodollar power is taking shape, explicitly sidelining Iran and even Israel. The reports say Tehran's axis of resistance is shattered, while Jerusalem finds itself increasingly isolated. Indeed, Riyadh's deals have set off alarm bells. U.S. defense companies scored a $14 billion air defense deal with Saudi Arabia, and the record $142 billion Lockheed Martin jet sale has Israeli commanders losing sleep. We are watching oil money morph into a new weapon. Even neighboring autocrats felt the tremors. At the Saudi-U.S. Investment Forum in Riyadh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman trotted out contracts for everything from AI labs to pipeline plants, the sort of mega projects that leave smaller states uneasy. Qatar, for example, had its own $1.2 trillion in agreements in Doha on this trip, including a $96 billion Boeing order, undercutting Israel's influence. Meanwhile, Syria's former insurgent leader met Trump in Riyadh by Saudi arrangement, a diplomatic slap at Israel. In short, Riyadh's Sunni vanguard is barreling ahead with American jets, tech giants, and cash troopers in its wake. The message is clear. Riyadh intends to play by its own rules. For all the relief that Washington and Riyadh are back together, others in the region are bracing for turbulence. This matters because it redraws the map of power. For decades, U.S.-Saudi relations were about oil for security. Now Riyadh is flipping the script by investing its oil wealth directly into America. As the White House notes, this package crystallizes growing momentum of the last 4 months, built on 8 decades of friendship since FDR's 1945 meeting with King Abdulaziz. Yet the scale is unprecedented. Saudi direct investment in the U.S. was only about $9.5 billion in 2023. Overnight, that's magnified by 2 orders of magnitude. This isn't just a deal, it's the inevitability mandate of a once oil-dependent kingdom demanding its place at the head of the table. Long-term plans like Vision 2030 clearly underlie this move. The Saudis have spent years transforming Riyadh into a hub for tech, energy, and tourism, and now they've turned that magnet on U.S. industry. American companies see opportunity. Data centers, airports, even entertainment cities are in the pipeline. For Washington, meanwhile, pocketing hundreds of billions is presented as a win for U.S. workers and security. But the deeper truth is global. By tying its destiny to American growth and defense, Riyadh effectively cranks up pressure on Iran and redraws alliances. This deal makes Saudi Arabia not just a consumer of U.S. security, but a chief investor in it. The power balance that the world took for granted, U.S. military might for Saudi oil and stability, is being rewritten. Why should average people care? Because these headlines affect everything from energy prices to world peace. If Saudi dollars flood American factories, jobs shift and strategic debates in Congress change. If the Saudis build AI labs with U.S. firms, the tech race accelerates. This is not some peripheral Middle East story. It's a potential rewrite of global economics. The historical currents have converged to make this outcome seem almost predetermined. Decades of petrodollars and aging generals have met the inevitability mandate. The world is moving to the rhythm of Riyadh's checkbook now, and it has every major player on edge. To understand today, look to yesterday. The U.S.-Saudi alliance is steeped in oil history. Ever since King Abdulaziz's 1945 pact with FDR, oil has underwritten American influence in the Gulf. In the 1970s, Riyadh's oil embargo showed the West that Aramco's punching power could cause economic cataclysms. The 1979 Iranian Revolution plunged the region into Cold War tension, pushing the Saudis further into America's arms. Successive U.S. presidents, Nixon, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, all reinforced the oil for security bargain. Saudi oil flowed freely, and American arms and bases kept rivals at bay. Saudi textbooks once bragged of two pillars of security: tankers in the Persian Gulf and warships in the Red Sea. Even the Saudis themselves remember. The Crown Prince's vision, 2030, launched in 2016, was born of this legacy, a promise to free the economy from oil's boom-bust cycle. Now it has come full circle. The kingdom is using its oil fortune to buy resilience on the world stage. In Riyadh's new master plan, the old oil wells are leveraged to fund chips, drones, and pipelines. It's as if an oil phoenix has risen from its own legacy, transforming fossil wealth into geopolitical firepower. One telling moment, at the summit, Trump even agreed to lift U.S. sanctions on Syria at Saudi urging, a radical reversal of U.S. policy that signals how much sway Riyadh now has. The Saudis have essentially made the U.S. court their favor, rather than the other way around. Understandably, this rattles observers. Anyone familiar with Middle East history sees that when Riyadh's money roars this loudly, history is setting a new course. The only question is whether the new paradigm will stabilize the region or ignite old rivalries all over again. Right now, the region is at a boiling point. Every player is asking, what happens next? The stakes are alarmingly high. U.S. defense contractors are already counting windfalls. GE Vernova's gas turbines, Guam $14.2 billion, and Boeing 737 jets, $4.8 billion, are headed to Saudi projects. Northrop Grumman announced a $14 billion air defense package with Riyadh. This surge of hardware is reshaping armies and air forces across the Gulf. The press calls it a game changer. American-made F-35 jets and missile systems will flood Saudi Arabia, altering military balances overnight. Neighbors are jittery. Israel, America's staunch ally, now feels the sting. One former Israeli PM warned that Israel is more and more looking like a spoiler as the new Sunni order takes shape. Tel Aviv realizes it no longer has a monopoly on U.S. support in the region. Tehran, too, is bracing for impact. With Saudi money and U.S. favor coalescing, Iran's proxies and nuclear ambitions are suddenly more exposed. Even Yemen's conflict has been affected. Gulf monarchs cheered a new ceasefire with the Houthis, but that also underscores how far Iran's old allies have been swayed. Domestically, the deal also has repercussions. Washington now holds its breath over $600 billion in cash moving through U.S. markets. Some fear an inflation surge if this much foreign investment comes flooding in. Capitol Hill is on edge. Already, opposition lawmakers are warning of a Saudi reset that might unravel if treaties aren't ratified or if human rights concerns flare up. In sum, the pressure cauldron has never been hotter. Every warehouse door opened by this investment is a potential conflict trigger. Every handshake conceals a question mark. The world is watching this experiment nervously, ready to applaud if it brings stability or to sound the alarm if it spins out of control. What comes next is anyone's guess, but the crystal ball is grim. Scenario analyses by strategists paint a stark picture. Consider Saudi Arabia's emerging nuclear ambition. Trump's team is negotiating U.S. help for a Saudi civilian nuclear program. If that goes through, it could provoke Iran and others to race for the bomb or spark covert proliferation crises. One likely scenario is a new arms race. Each regional power expands arsenals to match Saudi's splurge. Another sees oil markets thrown into chaos. Imagine Riyadh slamming the production valve shut or flooding it, as it did in the 1980s if geopolitical tensions spike. Global oil prices could skyrocket, triggering a worldwide recession much worse than 2022. On the diplomatic front, there are wildcards. One scenario has the US increasingly siding with Sunni monarchies at the expense of hardline allies, leading to fractured coalitions. Another imagines Riyadh failing to deliver on its domestic reforms. Vision 2030 runs out of cash, causing political instability in Saudi Arabia itself. Some analysts even warn of a big break scenario. If all deals suddenly collapse, Riyadh might lash out, using oil or regional proxies to punish perceived enemies. Meanwhile, think tanks quietly wargame these outcomes. US military planners have run hypothetical conflicts where multiple hotspots break out at once. Iranian-backed missile barrages on Gulf shipping, Israeli strikes on Syrian sites, proxy skirmishes in Iraq and Lebanon, all while the US must defend its own coasts at home. These war games show one thing clearly: risk is multiplying. The fork of fate has been set in motion. Whether the region heads towards stability or conflagration depends on the next few moves. One fact is certain: the problems of tomorrow will be shaped by this master plan today. Every Goliath has Davids plotting behind the scenes. For all Saudi wealth, smaller players are scrambling to adapt. Israel, feeling cornered, is quietly exploring new alliances, perhaps with India or even fringe Arab states, to offset Riyadh's clout. According to former Israeli officials, the Middle East is undergoing tectonic changes, while Netanyahu and his gang are paralyzed. In other words, Israel's decades of unquestioned dominance are being challenged and it's racing to find a counterweight. Iran faces a similar calculus. With its axis weakened, Tehran may intensify unconventional warfare, ramping up its proxies in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen to bleed Saudi influence. It may also rush diplomatic overtures to Turkey, Pakistan, or even Russia, seeking a new Security Council backer. Meanwhile, Europe and Asia, once comfortable as Saudi oil customers, must hedge their bets. China, for instance, might try to cozy up to Iran or buy cheap oil from OPEC to not rely on any one supplier. On the political side, a coalition of underdogs is forming in Washington. Congress and NGOs are already drawing battle lines. Some lawmakers are drafting bills to curtail arms shipments and to impose tougher scrutiny on foreign investments. Human rights advocates see a chance to leverage these deals for Saudi reform. Even within the US government, careers are on the line. Career diplomats and generals who backed a hardline Iran policy feel betrayed and are maneuvering to slow-walk new Gulf ties. This is David's doctrine in action. Smaller states and groups using every tool short of war to strike back at the giant. Whether they succeed or ignite a firestorm is unknown. But one thing is clear: Riyadh's gambit has forced every corner of the world to pick sides or find detours. The upcoming months will test whether these Davids can slingshot themselves to advantage or are ultimately swept aside. This image shows a Northrop Grumman executive amid the glitz of Riyadh's 2025 investment forum, emblematic of how deeply integrated Saudi and US interests have become. The US-Saudi alliance has entered a new era. Riyadh is now our largest foreign military sales partner, with over $129 billion in active cases. In fact, the latest arms bundle is the largest defense cooperation agreement in US history, a stunning landmark. US contractors are scrambling to gear up. Aircraft, missiles, radars, and satellites bound for Saudi service are flooding orders. But the ripple effects extend to all allies. Britain, France, and even emerging powers are recalibrating. British defense firms are eyeing a piece of Riyadh's procurement spree, while French investors jockey for Saudi energy projects. On the other side of the ledger, China and Russia see both threat and opportunity. If the West binds itself to Riyadh, they hope to capitalize on selling oil to Iran or expanding influence elsewhere in the region. The traditional logic that Middle East stability was an American responsibility is fracturing. Even within alliances, trust is tested. NATO partners watch nervously. Will the US now expect NATO forces to reinforce Gulf security in exchange for Gulf capital? In Asia, countries like Japan and India fret that US attention may drift from East Asia if the Middle East is deemed solved. The Saudis have pitched this as a win-win for everyone. Shared prosperity, Riyadh insists, but skeptics call it a gamble. On the Allied chessboard, every piece is moving. Saudi Arabia's old friends must ask themselves if they'll be pawns or major players in this new game. The alliances are rewriting their playbooks in real time, and each public statement hides private strategizing. Pentagon war games and think tank simulations repeatedly illustrate worst-case spirals. In one hypothetical exercise, simultaneous strikes on Persian Gulf oil fields and Red Sea shipping forced the U.S. to divert carrier groups, leaving the Pacific exposed, a strategic nightmare scenario. Another tabletop war game projects that if Riyadh and Tehran go head-to-head, world oil prices could spike by over 50% within days, potentially triggering energy rationing and economic collapse overseas. In academia, professors have begun constructing a Middle East blowback index tied to the Saudi plan, a risk metric that currently rates this strategy as critical. None of this data is public yet, but officials have privately admitted they're uneasy. The simulation outcomes all hinge on massive upheaval. City blackouts, cyber attacks, even new alliances forming overnight. Any of these outcomes would plunge the global order into chaos. Observers liken the current mood to the early 1930s, a prelude to a storm whose size is unknowable. The models do not yet spell out a winner. They only underline how many futures are on the table and how little control anyone really has over the next die roll. This countdown to chaos has just begun, and the conclusion is far from written. Will Saudi Arabia's billionaire blitz usher in a golden age of security and prosperity? Or will it ignite conflicts far beyond what any leader intended? The pieces have been placed, the cards dealt, yet any final outcome is still years away. One thing is certain: every government, company, and family on the planet will feel the effects. Americans will watch whether these deals revive blue-collar towns and secure new technology, or whether consumer prices and political discord surge in response. Neighbors like Israel and Iran will scramble to adapt. Even ordinary Saudi citizens, long promised reforms, may end up as spectators to their government's grand wager. The Middle East is shifting beneath our feet, but where it will settle is anyone's guess. In the smoky twilight of this game, only tension remains. Big promises have been made, trillions of dollars committed, and once unthinkable alliances formed. The scores will be tallied in the coming years. For now, we watch and wait, knowing this is a story with a long, uncertain ending, and no second act has even been written yet.